The first time I realized my wife's parents wanted me gone for good was the night I found a private investigator's report stuffed under my windshield wiper, the kind of thick envelope you don't pick up without a tremor because you know it's either ruin or revelation. And when I tore it open with my thumb right there in the dim light of the parking lot, I saw page after page of photographs of myself. Not the kind a man takes with his family on a beach, but the kind snapped from across the street. With a long lens, images of me leaving job sites, buying groceries, stopping for gas, each time stamped as though I were a fugitive instead of a husband who kissed his wife goodbye every morning and came home smelling of sawdust and sweat. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, that maybe some poor guy who looked vaguely like me was under surveillance for something I didn't want to know. But then I saw the note slipped inside the folder, a neat square of cream paper with the embossed initials HC. In the corner, and in handwriting so delicate it could have been traced with the edge of a knife, the words read, "You'll never be good enough, no matter how hard you pretend." The initials belonged to Helena, my mother-in-law, who had spent the past 3 years perfecting the art of disguising venom as etiquette, and as I stood in the lot with the hum of crickets scraping against the silence, I realized she wasn't content with whispered insults over dinner anymore. She was escalating, and she wanted me to know it. When I walked into our apartment that night, Mara was curled up on the couch with a blanket over her knees, reading one of the antique maps she loved, tracing coastlines with her finger as if she could smooth history itself, and I stood there with the envelope still in my hand, torn open like a wound. She looked up, saw my face, and whispered, "What happened?" I didn't answer at first. I just handed her the folder, and I watched her lips part as she flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing with every picture until she finally slammed it shut and said, "She wouldn't dare. Tell me she wouldn't dare, Daniel." "She dared," I said, my voice rougher than I meant, "and she wanted us both to know." Mara pressed her hand against her forehead and let out a bitter laugh, the kind that sounds like it's trying not to turn into a sob. "Do you understand what this means? She's not just being cruel anymore. She's building a case. She's planting seeds. If she's hiring investigators, she's preparing for something bigger. She doesn't just want to hurt you, Daniel. She wants to destroy us." I sat down across from her, the folder on the coffee table between us like a live grenade, and I said, "Then we need to be ready. Because if this is how she wants to play, I'm not going to stand still and let her bury me." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but her jaw tightened in that way I loved, the way that meant she wasn't going to back down. "She underestimates us," she whispered. "She thinks I'll choose her over you. She thinks I'll break." She looked at me then, fire and fear burning together in her gaze. "But she doesn't know how far I'll go to protect what's mine." That was the night everything shifted. The night when the war stopped being a quiet collection of sharp remarks and cold shoulders and became something much darker, because Helena had made her move, and whether we wanted it or not, we were already on the board. The days after the investigator's report felt like walking through a house where every mirror had been replaced with glass that showed only your flaws, because suddenly every move I made carried the weight of unseen eyes. And even the simple act of buying bread made me wonder if another lens was trained on me, waiting to twist the most ordinary moment into something sinister. And the worst part was that Helena seemed to revel in it, appearing at family gatherings with her polished smile and making comments so precise they felt like scalpels, little reminders that she knew things I didn't know she knew. The first real blow landed 2 weeks later, when a police officer showed up at my workshop just as I was finishing a custom oak staircase for a client, and he asked me if I had a moment to answer some questions about an alleged insurance fraud scheme, his tone not hostile but carefully neutral. And when I demanded to know what he was talking about, he explained that someone had submitted an anonymous tip claiming I had been inflating invoices and billing customers for work never performed. My hands shook as I showed him my records, every invoice, every signed receipt, because I have always been meticulous about keeping proof of my labor. And after 2 hours of reviewing everything, he finally admitted that nothing seemed amiss, but his parting words stayed lodged in my chest like splinters. "These tips don't usually come out of nowhere, sir. Someone wants us to believe you're up to something." When I told Mara that night, her face turned white and then red, a storm of emotions twisting through her features, and she grabbed her phone with trembling fingers. "I'm calling her," she said, but I caught her wrist before she could press dial. "No," I said firmly. That's exactly what she wants. If we confront her directly, she'll play innocent and make us look paranoid. She thrives on that game. We need proof before we strike. But Daniel, Mara whispered, tears streaming now, this is my mother. My mother. How do I fight her without losing myself? You don't, I told her, cupping her face in my hands. We fight her together, and if we lose anything, we lose it together. That's the only way we survive this. As if Helena had a sixth sense for timing, the very next day she invited us to dinner, framing it as a casual family evening. But when we arrived, the table was set like a stage, every piece of silverware polished to a mirror shine, and her husband Victor sat at the head with the air of a judge about to hear testimony. The conversation began light, but within minutes Helena steered it toward me, asking sly questions about my latest projects, where the money was going, whether I felt secure providing for a daughter who had grown up accustomed to a certain standard of living. Every word was a trap, every smile a blade hidden in velvet. When Mara finally snapped, slamming her hand on the table and demanding to know why her mother couldn't leave us alone, Helena merely tilted her head and said, "Darling, you misunderstand. I only want what's best for you. And sometimes what's best means seeing past the lies men tell to keep you small. A mother's instinct is rarely wrong." That was the moment I understood she wasn't just trying to drive a wedge between us. She was trying to rewrite our story, to plant so many doubts and accusations that even if Mara stayed by my side, the world around us would believe I was a fraud. And worse, she was winning allies. Victor, stoic and powerful, said nothing but didn't need to. His silence was endorsement enough, and Mara's younger sister, Lydia, who once used to joke with me like a brother, now avoided my eyes as if I carried some contagious disease. The escalation was working. Friends started pulling away. Invitations dwindled, and even one of my oldest clients hesitated before handing me his house keys for a job, muttering that he had heard some things. It was like poison seeping through water, colorless, tasteless, but deadly all the same. One night, exhausted and close to breaking, Mara and I sat on the balcony with the city lights flickering below us, and she whispered, "I found something." She slid her phone across the table, and on the screen was an email chain between her mother and the private investigator, proof that Helena had commissioned the photos and demanded he dig until he found something usable. It was the first crack in her armor, the first tangible evidence that we weren't just imagining the storm. But along with relief came terror, because buried in those emails was a single line that chilled me more than anything else: focus on his father. That's where the real leverage lies. Until that moment, I hadn't thought about my father in years, a man whose shadow was long and dark, and who had left scars on more than just me. And suddenly the ground beneath me tilted, because if Helena was digging there, she was reaching into the one part of my life I had tried hardest to bury. The night after Mara showed me those emails, sleep was impossible. I kept staring at the words about my father, those 5 small ones. That's where the real leverage lies, circling in my head like vultures. My father was not a man I ever wanted dragged back into my life. He had walked out when I was 12, a storm of gambling debts, angry creditors, and whispered stories I pieced together only in fragments. And the last time I saw him, he was being shoved into the back of a police car, while my mother clutched my hand so tightly I thought the bones might snap. To know Helena had reached into that graveyard of memories made me feel naked in a way even her investigator's photos never could. The next day, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, no return address, just my name written across the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a sentence scrawled in a sharp, hurried hand. "She's looking for me. Call this number if you want to know what she's found." Beneath it was a phone number I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted. It could have been a trap, another performance staged by Helena to corner me. But something about the writing, jagged and desperate, told me it was real, and against every ounce of common sense, I dialed. The voice on the other end was gravel wrapped in whiskey. "Daniel," it said, "you don't know me anymore, but I know you. This is your father." For a long time I said nothing, only listening to the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. Finally, I managed. "Why now? Why crawl out of the dirt after all these years?" "Because she's crawling in after me," he answered. "Your mother-in-law came sniffing around last week. She thinks I can give her something to use against you." I told her nothing, but she doesn't let go once she has a scent. You need to understand. If she finds what she's looking for, she'll burn you down with it. Mara was watching me from across the room, her face pale as she tried to read the half of the conversation she could hear. I put the call on speaker. What does she think you know? Mara asked sharply, leaning forward like a prosecutor. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Smart woman you married. Helena thinks I stashed money years ago, dirty money from the games I ran. She thinks Daniel knows where it is, or that I left him some proof. She doesn't care if it's true or not. She just wants enough smoke to convince everyone he's on fire. My throat was dry as ash. And is it true? Did you leave something behind? I left nothing but shame, he said, voice cracking with something that almost sounded like regret. But shame can be spun into evidence if someone wants it badly enough. For the first time since this war began, I felt the faintest glimmer of an ally, unlikely and dangerous as he was. My father might have been a criminal, but he wasn't Helena's pawn, not yet. We arranged to meet in a diner 2 towns over, neutral ground, and Mara insisted on coming, saying she wouldn't let me face him alone. When we walked in, he was already there, hunched over a chipped mug of coffee, his hair silver now, but his eyes sharp and restless. He looked at me like he was cataloging every inch of what I had become, and when Mara slid into the booth beside me, he gave her a nod of approval, as if to say, "You chose better than I ever did." We talked for hours, and what he told us made the blood drain from my face. Helena had offered him money, a staggering amount, to testify that I had been in on his old schemes, that I'd helped him hide funds when I was a teenager, that I'd learned fraud at my father's knee. It was a lie, but in court or in whispers, a lie spoken by my own father would be more than enough to poison my reputation forever. I didn't take it, he said, leaning across the table, his voice fierce. I may have been a rotten father, but I won't sell out my son. But she'll come at you from another angle. She always does. You need to be ready. Mara reached for my hand under the table, her grip firm. Then help us. Don't just warn us. If she's building a false story, we'll build the truth. Give us everything you have, every record, every name, every scrap of history that shows she's lying. If you want to make up for the past, this is your chance. For a long moment, he stared at her, and then slowly nodded. All right, but understand this. When you drag my past into the light, you drag me too. And the people who hated me back then, some of them still have long memories. It was a turning point. For the first time, we weren't just defending ourselves. We had a path forward, messy and dangerous though it was. Yet as we left that diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cost of aligning with my father might be higher than we could ever pay. And I could see it mirrored in Mara's eyes, that flicker of doubt, even as she squeezed my hand. And that night, as I locked up the workshop, I found another envelope taped to the door. Inside was a single photograph of Mara, taken from across the street as she walked home, and scrawled on the back in Helena's unmistakable hand were 4 words that made my blood run cold. Choose her, or lose her. The photograph of Mara was the last thread of restraint snapping in my chest, because until then Helena's cruelty had been aimed mostly at me, an endless barrage of slander and whispers designed to unravel my reputation. But that image of my wife, my heart, captured without her knowledge and handed to me like a ransom note, was proof that she had widened the battlefield. And when I stormed into the apartment that night with the photo still crumpled in my fist, Mara saw it in my eyes before I even spoke and whispered, "She's coming for us both now, isn't she?" I laid the photo on the table and said, "She already has. And I swear to you, Mara, I won't let her get away with it. Not one more inch." That vow was tested sooner than I imagined. 2 days later, we were served with notice of a formal complaint, filed anonymously but clearly Helena's handiwork, alleging that my business was a front for laundering stolen funds, specifically, money hidden years ago by my father. It was everything she had been weaving together, every insinuation, now sharpened into a blade. A hearing was scheduled within weeks, and if the board ruled against me, my license, my company, everything I had built would be stripped away. I wanted to rage, to slam fists against the walls, but Mara steadied me with a calm fiercer than any fury. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. "This is where we stop playing defense. She's given us the stage, Daniel. Now we burn her lies in front of everyone." With my father's help, we began assembling the truth. He handed over old journals, receipts, even arrest records that showed exactly where he was during the years Helena claimed I was secretly helping him. He admitted his sins in black and white, every ugly detail, but nowhere in those pages was my name. It was painful to read, like reopening an old wound, but it was also a shield, and I clung to it like armor. The night before the hearing, Mara confronted Helena in person against my protests. I found out later how it went from Mara herself, her voice shaking as she recounted it. She had walked into her parents' house unannounced, the chandelier casting cold light on Helena as she sipped wine at the table. "You've gone too far," Mara had said, her voice echoing in the room. "You wanted to destroy Daniel, but dragging my marriage, my life, into your games is unforgivable. Do you even hear yourself anymore?" Helena set her glass down with surgical precision and replied, "My darling, one day you'll thank me. Better a broken marriage than a ruined life. That man is poison, and I will not let you drink from his cup." And then Mara, my brave Mara, had leaned forward, fire blazing in her eyes, and whispered, "No, mother, the poison is you. And tomorrow, I'm going to prove it." When the hearing arrived, the room was packed with board members, attorneys, and a few faces from the community who had clearly come to watch the spectacle. Helena and Victor sat together at the front, her posture regal, his silence solid, while I sat with Mara and my father, who looked older than ever but strangely lighter, as though confessing his past had given him a kind of release. The accusations were read aloud, a litany of fraud and deceit tied to my name through half-truths and fabricated connections. Then came Helena's turn, and she spoke with the polished elegance of someone used to controlling rooms, her voice dripping with false sorrow as she claimed she had only ever wanted to protect her daughter, that she had uncovered concerning ties and could not, in good conscience, remain silent. She painted me as a man hiding behind charm and labor, carrying on the legacy of a criminal father. For a moment, it seemed to be working. Heads nodded, pens scribbled notes, and then Mara stood. She wasn't scheduled to speak, but she walked straight to the front, holding a folder in her hands, and when she looked at the board members, her voice rang clear. "My mother," she began, "would have you believe she is motivated by love, but love does not hire investigators to stalk her daughter's husband. Love does not bribe a man to lie about his own son. Love does not send threats written on the back of photographs. What you're seeing here isn't protection. It's obsession." She opened the folder and laid the investigator's emails on the table, the proof that Helena had orchestrated the surveillance. Then she handed over the photograph of herself with the threat written on the back. And finally, she produced my father's journals, not to bury him further, but to show the absence of my name in the very years Helena claimed I was complicit. The room shifted. I felt it like a tide turning. Helena's poise faltered, just for a heartbeat, but enough to show the crack. She tried to recover, insisting the emails were fabricated, the photo misinterpreted, but it was too late. The board members were no longer nodding. They were frowning, whispering to each other, looking at Helena the way one looks at a mask slipping from a face. When the ruling came, it was swift. The complaint was dismissed, my license restored, and Helena warned against further interference. It should have felt like victory, and in a way it did, but as we walked out of that room, Mara gripping my hand tightly, I caught Helena's eyes across the hall. There was no defeat in them, only a cold, burning promise that this war was not over, and in that moment I understood that even stripped of credibility, she would keep coming, because she wasn't fighting for truth. She was fighting for control, and the cost of denying her that control was only just beginning to show itself. In the days after the hearing, I kept waiting for peace to settle over us like a long-awaited summer rain, but instead it was more like standing in the eye of a hurricane, knowing the other wall of the storm was still out there and would eventually slam back through. Helena disappeared from our daily lives. No phone calls, no dinners, no carefully staged concerns. And at first Mara thought maybe the warning from the board had scared her into silence, but I knew better. Silence, for Helena, was never retreat, it was recalibration. The next strike came not with a bang, but with a whisper. Rumors began to surface at the edges of our world, whispers that Mara and I were planning to move away, that our marriage was crumbling under the weight of scandal, that my father had been seen meeting with known criminals again. It was smaller than before, subtler, but the effect was the same. Neighbors turning their heads as we walked by, clients hesitating before shaking my hand. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and the woman holding the blade was my wife's own mother. One night, Mara sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face pale, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of it all was pressing her down. "Daniel," she whispered, "what if this never ends? What if no matter what we prove, no matter how we fight, she'll always find another way to twist the knife? I love you, but I can't live in a battlefield forever." Her words broke something inside me, because they were not a threat, not an ultimatum, but the exhausted truth of someone who had been forced to choose between loyalty to her husband and the blood ties that had defined her entire life. And in that moment, I realized revenge was not about winning a single battle. It was about ending the war once and for all, even if it meant playing a game as ruthless as hers. With my father's reluctant help, I built a plan. He still had contacts, people who owed him favors, people who remembered the old debts Helena had hidden in her perfect life. For years she had been careful to keep her own hands clean, but nobody with her level of influence is ever spotless. And slowly we began to piece together the truth. Offshore accounts, hidden transactions funneled through charities, deals made in Victor's name but benefiting Helena's private ventures. It was all there, buried under layers of polish, and when Mara saw the evidence for herself, her face went cold in a way I had never seen before. "She wanted to destroy you with lies," Mara said softly, "but we'll destroy her with truth." The day we revealed it was not at a board hearing or a courtroom, but at a family gathering, a birthday party for Lydia, where Helena expected to parade her control as usual. She was radiant, laughing, sipping champagne, until Mara stood and tapped her glass for attention. With a calmness that silenced the room, she laid out the evidence: emails, bank records, signed transfers. She spoke not as a daughter pleading with a mother, but as a woman exposing a fraud, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Helena's. By the time she finished, the room was silent except for the sound of Helena's breathing, sharp and uneven. Victor stared at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. Lydia covered her mouth in shock, and for once, Helena had no words. It should have felt triumphant, but as we walked out, Mara's hand gripping mine like a lifeline, the silence inside her told me this victory had cost her something irretrievable. That night, she wept in my arms, not for losing her mother, because Helena had been lost to her long ago, but for losing the illusion that family could ever be repaired. In the weeks that followed, Helena's influence crumbled. Victor distanced himself, her social circle shrank, and eventually, whispers of investigations began to swirl. She had built her empire on control, and now control had slipped through her fingers like water. Yet even as her world collapsed, I could not bring myself to celebrate. Because revenge, I learned, is never clean. It may deliver justice, but it also leaves scars. Mara and I survived, stronger in some ways, but shadows lingered, her sleepless nights, my father's haunted eyes, the knowledge that we had not just defeated a woman but obliterated a family tie. One evening, months later, Mara asked me a question that has stayed with me ever since. We were sitting on the balcony, the city lights flickering below, when she turned to me and whispered, "Daniel, did we win? Or did we just make sure no one could?" I had no answer then, and I still don't. But I know this. When someone wages war on your life, you either surrender or you fight, and we fought. Whether that makes us victors or just survivors, I will leave for others to decide.